girl in a straw hat with her arms out in a cornfield. That is a scarecrow.
Shut up, it is not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Hot take, but they, them can still be used to misgender someone, and I don't think anyone cares enough to really address it. Who said that? Who said that? No, but seriously, all jokes aside though, I don't think anybody talks about this issue enough, and it really bothers me how this is so normalized, because I've had this happen to me frequently, and it's either ignored or excused when they're corrected, and I don't think people realize how it's genuinely transphobic and harmful. Since it's Pride Month, I want to try speaking up about this issue and bring awareness towards it. Now guys, before I begin, do I give up they them energy?
They, them, energy. They, them, energy. They, them, energy. They, them, energy. They, them, energy.
Let me just reiterate that using they on someone not knowing their pronouns beforehand isn't transphobic, but constantly using they on someone if they do not identify with that pronoun and you've already been corrected by their pronouns numerous times is transphobic. However, using indefinite pronouns to refer to a singular individual that is categorized by a group of people and not on an actual person/individual in a sentence is not transphobic. It's basic standard English, and anyone with common sense would know the difference between referring to a singular individual by they them and referring to a general group of people as they them and using indefinite pronouns. Disclaimer, this video also isn't aimed directly at anyone, and I'm simply speaking about a general perspective. I'm speaking up for people who don't go by they them and still feel uncomfortable or unseen when referred to by these pronouns. Me being one of those people myself. This video is not talking about people who go by they them pronouns or don't mind going by them. Please stick to the end of the video to hear me out. I think using they them as an excuse to misgender someone just because it's gender neutral, even after being corrected, is, and I'm sorry, but it's quite literally blatant transphobia, just for the sheer mockery and dismissiveness of trans and queer identity. I understand that not knowing someone's pronouns and using they them to be respectful because you don't want to assume, and even with myself, I do this very often. But I also want to clarify that I don't consider this to be assuming one's pronouns and or gender identity. I think it's just trying to be respectful with the intent to not want to misgender. But this thinking only goes to an extent for some individuals, unfortunately. However, a lot of people claim that this is one of the reasons why they refer to someone by they them pronouns, which if you don't want to misgender someone and want to be respectful, I think that's an extremely valid take, and I can only agree to a certain extent. Due to how often this reason gets abused very, very easily, and when often corrected, it's just, oh, I didn't know the pronouns beforehand. So it's just like, why not just correct yourself, apologize, and move on? 60% of individuals who make this claim also see the said person's profile with the pronouns and still use they them on that person anyway. Why make a whole ass excuse about it? Then the people who do this literally claim to be an ally or a supporter. It's just like, what? That is the exact opposite. Now. I know that misgendering someone doesn't always equate to transphobia, and in this scenario, and with how I'm structuring sentences based off of my own experiences, plus with the concept I'm describing in great detail, I argue against such a narrative. Believing you have the right to simply deny someone's identity and refusing to respect their pronouns is by definition prejudice, since you are causing harm against a minority. Showing an act of bigotry and prejudice against transgender people is harmful. And last time I recall, prejudice against gender individuals is transphobic. Do not call or label yourself an ally or a supporter of the LGBTQIA+, if you're simply not going to respect a transgender person's pronouns. When you refer to someone by they and you're corrected and someone tells you the right pronouns and it's in a respectful, informative manner, why do you feel the need to continue to use they by default? Claim it's just because you want to be respectful. Is somehow not using they an inconvenience for you? I genuinely do not understand this mindset. Do you continue to refer to individuals by those pronouns for the sake of your own selfish comfort? Is because you want to continue to use it even after being corrected so that you don't want to feel weird about it? And I think it is just used as an excuse to harm transgender individuals and or those with queer identities. I think we should all normalize that constantly referring to someone who doesn't go by gender-neutral pronouns should be generally considered as misgendering, and I think it should be taken just as serious as other forms of misgendering because, well, that's what it is. It's misgendering. But for some reason, that is constantly invalidated. From personal experience, most people who are trans get called out for misgendering other trans people. Use the excuse, oh, well, I'm trans too, so I can't misgender, which makes zero fucking sense. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every trans person makes this excuse. As a transgender person, let me just emphasize that a trans person can still be transphobic even if they themselves are transgender. How? Here's a few reasons. The top two that are most likely common that I can name on the top of my head is either internalized transphobia, which intertwines and affects how they view other trans people and themselves, which is prejudicism. The second most likely reason is because they simply just don't respect other transgender people's identities that aren't harmful. Being transgender doesn't save you from being transphobic towards another transgender person or misgendering them. However, taking advantage of this knowledge is weird. What I'm referring to when I say this is this video.
I'm on some dumb shit. By the way, what he say? He can tell I ain't missing no meals. Come through and fuck him in my automobile.
Let me just say, you can still misgender a cisgender person because you're referring to them by pronouns that they don't identify as. And any reasonable human being would see this video and think that's very weird, by the way. You can't only misgender transgender people, it can be cis folk as well, and that's what a lot of people just don't understand. You can misgender anybody. So generally, only pointing at cisgender people and saying only they can misgender transgender people is weird. Vice versa. The official Wikipedia page considers misgendering to refer to someone using a word, especially a pronoun, or form of address that does not reflect their gender identity. And multiple other sources share a similar definition. Don't get my words mixed up though. I'm not saying that you can be transphobic towards cisgender people, which is just brain dead logic. But I'm just saying it's still possible to misgender them. I also find it so odd to me that people who do constantly misgender someone using they almost always claim it's to avoid misgendering, but they were just informed of the person's pronouns, and I don't know why this is a frequent excuse to misgender someone, if not the most common. I understand back then we used they them to refer to someone to be respectful, but now it's been an overpopularized excuse to misgender someone. I've also seen transgender people who have transitioned being referred to as they, and it's so strange to me because they're telling you their pronouns and are open about being transgender on their social media pages, and yet, oh, I didn't want to misgender. It's always the excuse being said. But the said trans person is open about their trans experience and has their pronouns stated everywhere on their profile. I also see the excuse, it's gender neutral, when that's just simply not the case. Also, referring to a transgender person who just transitioned and you want to call them by gender neutral pronouns is kind of crazy to me because it's like, that's not, like, those aren't their pronouns. I think that's just really, disrespectful. I think you're saying that they don't look like their gender, but they want to look as. You're saying that they're not looking like it. Or that they look confusing. Like, that's really weird. That's just my take though. They, them pronouns are gender neutral pronouns, however that is mainly referring to someone's personal gender identity. Referring to someone by they, them pronouns when their gender identity isn't gender neutral, and you're fully aware of their pronouns before referring to the individual by they, them is just transphobia. In my own experience, I've had people will refer to me by they, them pronouns just because they didn't like me, which, let me just also reiterate, misgendering someone because you don't like them is also transphobic, and dare I say, more transphobic than the examples I've given out because this reason is actually with malicious and harmful intent that should be said without it having to be explained. Misgendering someone simply because you don't like them is wrong. That is bad, and do not do that. I've personally had people who know I specifically do not like being referred to by they, them, and take advantage of this, and will continue to refer to me by they, them, knowing I would be uncomfortable, which is fucking crazy and so immature. Since the reason of misgendering someone because you don't like them is pretty much self-explanatory and it's obviously extremely harmful, I'm not going to explain any further how it's wrong. And since that's pretty much all I wanted to say in this video, the basic end conclusion is don't misgender someone and respect their people. Don't misgender people and don't misgender people and respect their pronouns. That is my rant. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and I'll see you next video. Thank you, bye bye.